Thank you very much, Barbara, and good morning, everybody. And when Barbara was saying I'm the mother of volunteering, as long as she doesn't say I'm the grandmother, that's all right. But anyway, we're talking this morning about the European dream. And last Sunday, Dan O'Brien had an interesting article in the Sunday Independent. If Europe has a future, is it to the east or to the west, ran the headline. But at the end of the piece, he looked at the results of a worldwide study which posed the question, do you believe that the children today will be worse off than their parents? The Chinese were the least pessimistic, at less than 10%. The great American dream seems to be on shaky enough ground, with 60% of Americans believing that the next generation will be worse off than this one. But the Europeans, however, were the most pessimistic, with Italy hitting 70%, the UK hitting 75%, and the gloomy French exceeding 90%. 9 in 10 French people do not see a better future for their children. Ireland, as a matter of interest, didn't take part. That'll probably get the best laugh of the day, or of my speech, and it wasn't meant to be funny, but anyway. But the article itself finished with 2 very sobering sentences. He said, living without hope is not a good thing. And if hope has been lost in Europe, it may not be long before our faith in democracy follows suit. So in that context, is it reasonable to make some of the following connections? France just elected 24 National Front MEPs out of a total of 74. Marine Le Pen, who succeeded her father, Jean-Marie, has become the more acceptable face of French right-wing nationalism, which is mixed with a bit of xenophobic and racist behaviour. But she succeeded for the first time in topping the poll in France. They want France for the French, and they seek to rid themselves of all of the Brussels bureaucracy. The United Kingdom elected 24 UK Independence Party MEPs, also topping the poll at 27.5%. They've backed the Tories into a corner, and Cameron responded by attempting to play the part of the man who stood up to Europe by refusing to support Jean-Claude Juncker's nomination for Commission President. In many ways, it was a pale reflection of Margaret Thatcher's I want my money back, because where she succeeded, and they still get the British rebate, he failed. Nonetheless, UKIP's rise will not only force a British referendum, it also pushes him to play out national politics on a European stage. And while all European Prime Ministers do it at one time or another, they rarely play the same story over and over again in different scenarios. Italy returned 17 MEPs from Beppe Grillo's five-star movement, where they took second place overall. They were actually expected to top the poll, but they were edged out by the charming Renzi, shall we call him. He's the newest kid on the block in Italy. Grillo, a former circus clown who campaigns largely on social media and town hall events, is not strictly anti-European, but he is certainly anti-establishment. Other anti-establishment European parties returned different numbers in different countries, but virtually all countries are represented, from Jörg Haider in the Netherlands to the True Finns in Finland to Syriza in Greece. However, with all of that, the swing against the European project was far from universal, and a quick thought of the largely pro-European parties in the Parliament, the EPP, the Socialists, ALDE and the Greens, gives you 529 out of 751. So just 2/3 of the Parliament could be described as broadly pro-European. But still, there is a movement, and citizens across the EU, either by staying away in huge numbers, 29% voted in Hungary, 25% in Croatia, 18% in the Czech Republic. So either by staying away or by electing significantly more Eurosceptic MEPs, those who vote are delivering a message that they want change. That's clear. But what does that entail? What does that change mean? Because to me it seems to mean different things in different places. If you go to Northern Europe, the Eurosceptic vote is largely nationalistic, anti-immigration, right-wing. Different shades from Finland to France, from the UK to Hungary. Some of it is ugly, discriminatory, homophobic, racist. But more of it stems from a sense of, we're just sick to the teeth of all those people, largely Eastern Europeans, who come here and take our jobs and live off our welfare. And we sometimes forget in this country that France and the Netherlands voted against the first Lisbon Treaty. Remember the Polish plumber? That attitude has hardened and it has spread. Many Northern European countries champion austerity, and they see it as a way of keeping their southern cousins in check. And more, they want less Europe. And I see that. I'm a member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. You might remember the yellow card that was introduced in Lisbon, where national parliaments can try to put a halt to European proposals. More and more of those yellow cards are coming from Germany, from the UK, from the Netherlands, from Finland, from Denmark, and they're all coming on social and economic policy. They don't want Europe to play a role. And crucially, of course, the Northern Europeans want to cut the budget, and they did. They cut it by a whopping 10%. Our southern colleagues, on the other hand, want to relax fiscal constraints. Renzi, the new Italian Prime Minister, wants to find flexibility within the fiscal compact. In general, our southern European colleagues welcome EU action in social and employment affairs, and they tend to favour more EU rather than less. But they have different challenges also. Just to remind you, last October, 366 migrants drowned off the coast of Lampedusa in northern Italy. Every month, Italy spends an extra €9 million on stepping up its Coast Guard patrols. And Spain, Greece and Italy believe we need greater solidarity and burden sharing when it comes to illegal migrants. But the divisions in Europe are not just north-south. They're also east-west. Take the Visegrad group of countries, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland and Slovakia. By virtue of geography and history, they have shared certain painful experiences at the hands of the Russians, and 3 of them border Ukraine. But rather than having a common stance, we find that Hungary is largely pro-Russian, Slovakia is ambivalent, certainly it's hostile towards NATO. The Czech Republic is not explicitly pro-Russian, but allows Russian commercial and other interests a great deal of latitude. Poland, on the other hand, is quite pro-European and a very, very serious member of NATO. And it deploys a major part of its armed forces in the Baltic area. Latvia and Lithuania, in recent times, are showing greater interest in NATO. So we see that even within that part of Europe, we have very different perspectives and different interests. If we move west, we come to Switzerland. Now, Switzerland isn't a member of the EU, but it's linked by trade agreements and other association agreements. Now, the Swiss have always seemed a bit of a sober crew, with their watches and their banks keeping their economy afloat, so there was no need for any grubby European funds. They didn't need to come with the begging bowl. Their interesting mix of representative and direct democracy, honed over many centuries, seems to have served them well. But recently, they had their own little hissy fit when they voted not to allow freedom of movement for EU citizens. The Germans certainly didn't like it, and there were a lot of other countries that were miffed. There was even talk of a few sanctions to tell the Swiss that too can play that game. And then if we come further west to what we like to call the periphery, Ireland, what did our elections tell us about the European dream? We have 11 MEPs, 3 independents, 2, Nessa Childers and myself, broadly pro-European, but not slavishly so. Ming loves Europe, but hates the EU. And he says that all the time, so I'm not misquoting him. And we have 4 Sinn Féin MEPs. They can answer for themselves. They say they're not anti-EU, but I think perhaps they're anti-this EU. But as I said, they can answer for themselves. We have 4 Fine Gael MEPs, and the one Fianna Fáil MEP we have is a member of a Eurosceptic group. So we have Euro-realists and Europhiles and Eurosceptics, and we even had Euro-Ming, at least that was his Twitter handle. But what about the European dream in Ireland? When I was talking to small business owners in Burr and Offaly, or in Longford Town, nobody mentioned anything about a European dream. And when I knocked on doors in the rain in Kilcock, or believe it or not, beautiful sunshine in Belmullet, Nobody mentioned any of the European issues that we had agonised over for 5 years. For those of you who know about it, ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, I got thousands of emails. Twitter went mad for months. Most people in Ireland don't know what it is, and yet we agonised over it. And finally, the Parliament threw it out. And all the other things that seemed so important at the time, things about passenger name recognition, about civil liberties, about the right to be forgotten, about net neutrality, all of those big issues that we spend so much time in Europe, nobody talked about it here. Now, I know that people are concerned with what concerns themselves. We all are. If you have a child that has special needs, that's your priority. Yes, in Ireland, when it comes to Europe, we talk about the CAP, and we, of course, have the Habitats Directive, which prevents turf cutting. But the truth of it is, I probably had more groups coming to me, community and environmental groups, looking to use the Habitats Directive to prevent everything from the building of a wind farm to the siting of a dump. So, you know, people, I think, look to Europe in some sort of a broad way. They look at the anti-discrimination legislation and they hope that in some way it can help to enforce their rights. But this time it was different, because overarching all of that, this time, there was real anger out there as well. There was disappointment that was hardened into anger, because rightly so, we know that we're shouldering an unbearable debt that simply was put on our shoulders to save European banks from collapsing. We took one for the team, and there has been no real relief or payback. And many Irish people are becoming embittered, and in some way, some solutions will have to be found to burden share with the Irish. For many years and for too long, we were fed on a diet of European funding, and it reached its zenith when Albert Reynolds, in an effort to get Ireland to support the Maastricht Treaty, told us there were 8 billion reasons to vote yes to Maastricht. And now, 22 years later, that 8 billion has been multiplied by 8 and has vanished into the black hole of the Irish banks. The euro, which according to John Major was the triumph of bad politics over good economics and which was supposed to hold European economies together, the euro has almost been our undoing, and still may be. Despite Mario Draghi's bold moves, there are still huge divergences across the EU, from surplus countries to deficit countries, from 50% unemployment in some member states to almost full employment elsewhere. In many ways, Europe has no overall vision, no single unifying purpose. It agonises over finding a coherent voice on Palestine, or an agreement on Russian sanctions, or even a united front when trying to I won't say conclude because we still have a long way to go, but to broker a trade deal with the US. So, what is it about the EU? Barbara mentioned that back in 2004, those 10 new countries were so eager to join the EU. Now Hungary and the Czech Republic are not just lukewarm, they're distinctly cool. Yet if you go to Serbia, membership for joining the European Union began on the 21st of January this year, and in their most recent elections, every single member of Parliament that was elected, both government and opposition, is pro-European. If you go to Ukraine, recent presidential elections before the recent trouble indicated a reasonably strong support for a pro-European agenda. So, at one level, can we say that some countries outside the EU can't wait to get in, and some inside the EU can't wait to get out? So does that indicate something else? Does it indicate a broader disaffection from representative democracy as we know it? Just 2 months ago, the party of Milos Caesar did not exist in Slovenia. Yet on July 13th of this year, it won almost 35% of the vote in the general election. The party that had been in government previously, the Positive Slovenia Party, failed to reach the 4% threshold to get into Parliament, and so have not one single representative. I mentioned Beppe Grillo, I mentioned UKIP, I mentioned Marine Le Pen, and as I said in Ireland, out of 11 MEPs, the majority, 6, are Sinn Féin and independent. So what's happening? I sometimes wonder, are voters getting bored with their politicians? Do they want change? Are they really disaffected? Are they just dissatisfied? Do they want distraction? Just look at Cameron's reshuffle recently. Out with the white middle-aged men in suits and in with the young women. Mind you, Enda didn't follow his role, so maybe he knows something that Cameron doesn't. So is it all on the surface? Is it all about the change, the latest brand, or does it go deeper? Is representative democracy where political parties make promises they can't keep and pre-election rhetoric is never and can never be matched by post-election policy? Is representative democracy under serious threat? Cynicism is rife in Western democracies. Membership of political parties is collapsing, and citizens, as they ask more and more from the state, and as their dependency on the state grows, so does their disdain for politics and for politicians. The political elites, so-called, have failed to deliver, and voters are looking for alternatives. And for now, the alternative is one whose message resonates today for tomorrow. But when disappointment and disillusionment sets in, and it will the system itself be under threat? I don't know, maybe we've fooled ourselves into thinking that Western democracy, representative democracy, which certainly underpins all EU member states and the EU itself, maybe we've fooled ourselves into thinking it can deliver when, at times at least, it seems to serve up only disillusionment and disappointment, and as I said earlier, disdain for politicians. So in all of that, what now for the European dream? Our problem is the dream of a peaceful Europe, conflict-free. It's important, but it no longer resonates. We as people, we expect peace. We watch Gaza, we watch Syria, we watch the Ukraine on our TVs, but we believe we're not threatened. So that dream is only for old men. We believe we're safe. How can you replace that dream with things like fiscal union, completion of the single market, energy, food security, free trade with the US, for Europe to be a player, an influencer on the world stage? All of those are worthy goals indeed. Some of them are crucial, but they don't hold people, they don't bind people, and they don't inspire people. So maybe we need to take a reality check. Maybe the time for that kind of inspiration is gone, for now at least. Maybe we need to give up on the dream as an end in itself and try to deliver on a number of well-defined objectives. We have to stop over-promising and be clear about where our limits and constraints are, both at national and European level. And the European Parliament has a role to be responsible, and that we are probably the only parliament in the world that has the luxury of making legislation, but we never have to find the resources to implement it. So we need to keep that in mind. And we should be more proactive with the Commission in looking at legislation that's no longer fit for purpose, and then bin it, and only replace it where there's good evidence and convincing evidence that it needs to be replaced. Maybe Juncker was close to the mark when he said that national politicians have to stop claiming victory when they return home from Europe. Either we all succeed or there is no success. I believe Juncker is right, because victory for one is defeat for another, and Europe cannot be built on that kind of quicksand. More than anything else, I believe, the EU needs to stabilise its currency. Mario Draghi, we will do what it takes, continues to work as long as he does what it takes. But it's going to take more and more, and Draghi can't do it all himself. Political agreement will be necessary to finish that job and rebalance surplus and deficit countries. Otherwise, we will hit the wall. So for now at least, I think we need to forget about the dream. I think we have to wake up to the cold reality of where the EU is now, and we have to recognise and facilitate our differences. And we need to act only when it's for the benefit at European level. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, I believe the challenges for the EU are not only internal, they are external. And just perhaps, if we can convince European citizens that by working together, we can face and surmount those challenges, then maybe we have some chance. Whether it's the Russian bear prowling in Ukraine and threatening gas supplies, or the Chinese powerhouse where much of our production is now being outsourced to, or whether it's Uncle Sam's spy in the sky or the economic challenges from the BRIC countries, we now need to convince our citizens that we can only compete if we work together. Maybe then, maybe we can forge a new dream. Thank you.